Good evening. My name is Joe Kelly. This is my policy analysis for Social Work 4410, Implementation of Social Welfare Policy at Savannah State University. The presentation will cover field placement, social problem, policy overviews, statistics, historical analysis, social analysis, economic analysis, political analysis, as well as our overall evaluation of the policy and proposals for policy reform. When I applied for field placement, I expressed that my primary interest was the justice system. I interviewed with Ms. Barbara Williams in March. She's over the Office of Circuit Public Defense. This office, they're basically responsible for helping low-income individuals with legal services. They also link them with lawyers to also represent them. My passion for social work stems from a desire to help others through referral to resources, maintaining confidentiality, respect, empathy, as well as applying social policy, basically to empower them. All right, so the social problem. The main social problem that this policy analysis will deal with is sexual assault. Sexual assault is basically defined as any physical contact of a sexual nature that is forced and not welcome. It could happen to any person, any place, regardless of gender, status, any of that. It has very detrimental effects such as PTSD, substance abuse, alcoholism, as well as anger. Another main concern is I guess the lack of reporting because of stigma. And as we've seen with the recent Me Too movement, the victim blaming sort of tendency that follows that. Um, another key term to remember when it comes to sexual assault is consent. The University of Michigan defines consent as absolute permission for contact to be given, and this was back in 2014. All right, and now moving forward a little bit, prison rape specifically, it refers to assault that occurs in jails, prisons, police lockups, as well as juvenile detention centers and illegal immigrant holding locations. This can involve penetration, groping, and bondage. Um, Research also found that it is indeed more common in the males. It can also involve, the act occurring between two inmates or an inmate and a staff member. All right, so here we come to the actual policy, the Prison Rape Elimination Act. The goal of this legislation is to suppress the prevalence of sexual assault and harassment in correctional facilities in the country. It's important for implementing nationally recognized standards for prevention as well as services for victims of rape. It places accountability and a sense of responsibility for the facilities as well as its staff and administrators. There's also importance placed on training for these staff members as well as the emphasis on audits. Now, these audits are not just mandated tests just to get these facilities to just pass through and just meet the requirements. It's really important because it upholds compliance as well as it promotes safety. Now, a main point of the Prison Rape Elimination Act is a zero tolerance policy for any form of sexual misconduct, the types of misconduct that I mentioned earlier, as outlined. Actually, I spoke with Miss Mary Ellen Masterilli in March. She's the individual that actually wrote the Preparing for Our PREA Ethical Leadership in Action American Jails, that piece of literature that was used in my analysis. I spoke with her and she was very enthusiastic and she expressed, the significance of this legislation in upholding safety and morality. This policy is overseen by the National Prison Rape Elimination Commission, and they're basically a spin-off commission of PREA, the policy. This commission was put in place to, I guess, study policies like PREA in an effort to prevent and properly address the issue. And basically, main points or concepts related to PREA are prevention, response, investigation, as well as discipline, or or as it comes to that termination, as well as prosecution. So here are some stats. These stats are important to consider in order to understand the scope of this issue and what needs to be done. My research, I found that over 200,000 inmates are victimized yearly in the United States. A 2016 study that was commissioned by Alison Downer. She's actually a psychiatrist. Her study concluded that 12 to 13% of these attacks involve some sort of mental illness, whether that be depression or PTSD, any of those sorts of illnesses. Um, a study that was released in 2014 that was actually conducted in 2012 by the Bureau of Justice Statistics concluded that, well, it should come as no surprise, the sexual inappropriate behavior, it is more prevalent in prisons than jails. I also wanted to point out that the Bureau of Justice Statistics, they're basically responsible for collecting, analyzing, and sharing data pertaining to crime in the U.S. This bureau is they're very instrumental in working with the policy itself, as well as the conversation of prison rape in the United States. Another, perhaps the most shocking piece of research that I came across was the fact that half of these acts are committed by prison personnel. And as I've stated before, prison rape, it poses significant repercussions as it comes to personal well-being or emotional well-being. Um, it causes anger, depression, and as a result, it could also lead to crime both in and out of prison. Historical analysis. The Prison Rape Elimination Act was the very first policy that addressed assault in the prison system head on. The only previous legislation that was put in place was the Violence Against Women Act, and that was in 1992. And as the name suggests, it was only for women, and it didn't really cover those that were behind bars. So that was a problem. Like, and then moving forward a little bit, a really big, I guess, piece of the bringing this policy into fruition was the publishing of a piece of literature in 2001. It was called No Escape, Male Rape in U.S. Prisons. Now, this literature was very monumental in changing the conversation of sexual assault in males, especially in our prisons. It had a lot to do with changing the mindset and the sentiments surrounding the issue. Um, when PREA was originally drawn up, it basically received bipartisan support, meaning that it was supported on both sides. There was very little disagreement, which is rare. It also main concerns that were basically brought to the table. Uh, it surrounded training, lack of support, or lack of reporting, as well as the consequences, both physical as well as financial, when it comes to public safety, as well as the economy of not dealing with this issue. So like crime, as well as treating HIV that basically resulted from the attacks. The PREA Resource Center was also drawn up as a result of this policy, and they basically worked with the Department of Justice. The standards, they basically they're responsible for upholding the standards, as well as they also oversee the audits. All right, social analysis. This is the part that breaks down basically the gravity of the issues that this policy carries. PREA, it has significance on how sexual assault is dealt with in facilities as well as how it is prosecuted. PREA also carries significance on the public perception of what sexual assault, what it is, and what it entails, and any impact that that has, like a domino effect. It also is basically instrumental in upholding the very dignity of the justice system, the respect, the reputation, the competence that is expected. Now, here we come to the economic analysis part of the presentation. This is basically the part that I kind of draw a link between the actual policy as well as the funds and the cost effectiveness. Um, Now, obviously, this is a moral issue, so obviously, technically, finances shouldn't be brought up, but it has to be because it does affect other aspects. Um, Now, during my research, I found that over 35 million has been spent on implementing this policy since 2011. 8 million has been spent in 2008 alone, just to give you I guess a view of how much it goes into it annually. The Department of Justice, in their 2013, they did regulatory impact assessment of PREA. This basically kind of, I guess, outlined the cost effectiveness as well as how much each aspect of this policy, how much it costs. And it found that the cost of upholding the compliance is estimated to be around 470 million per year. Um, and then moving forward, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in their handbook from this year, it said that I found this interesting. It said that the cost includes education services, collection of data, training, as well as preparing for audits. So kind of going back to what I said earlier when it comes to what PREA is all about. It's also cost also it also covers any new technology. Obviously, as time progresses, new technology come around, so it also goes into that, such as scanners during inspections and searches. Um, Now, this funding, obviously, it comes from taxpayer dollars. So yes, it does. The allocation of these funds, it does affect other aspects of the economy. Now, a main concern of this is how is it being how will, I guess, let's say if we were to go into some kind of financial downturn once again, any impact that would have on this policy and how that would impact the prevalence of this issue again. All right, so political analysis. Another important piece to remember when it comes to the historical aspect of this policy is that during the initial inception, a key part of this was the fact that lawmakers they collaborated extensively with administrative personnel in prisons as well as correctional systems in the United States. This is the first time that this really happened. They really wanted to. They didn't want to just draw something. They really wanted to speak with actual people that work with these individuals day to day in order to, I guess, draw up the best legislation possible, the most effective legislation possible. Key players to consider when it comes to PREA as well as prison rape. That's important to consider because it basically gives us insight into who is affected the most. That's the inmates of these facilities, obviously, the staff, health organizations, and the general public. The current stance of opposition of PREA, I guess, as time has moved forward, there has been opposition. There has been I guess, suggestion that their PREA has failed in some areas. a common argument is that it's not intended for certain sectors. So basically, there are areas that this issue isn't existent, and we all know that is false. Another argument is that PREA, the guidelines don't really guarantee that it, suppress this issue 100%. So basically, they suggest that it's a waste of time. While the Prison Rape Elimination Act is instrumental in providing protection as well as implementation of prevention for prison rape, it does have some inconsistencies when it comes to compliance for certain areas. There are areas that are not the compliance is not followed or not followed at all by correctional facilities. Another area that is a main concern um, are reports that go ignored by administration. This causes discouragement, and thus the cycle continues. Another concern is any and all unequal or wasteful spending of the funds that are intended for uh, the implementation of this. So if funds are used for other frivolous things that really don't go towards the policy, then it's that could be detrimental. Next are the proposals for policy reform. Um, One is having resources available that ensure that this policy is upheld as time progresses. As time progresses, so will technology, and so must I guess the guidelines of this policy. It has to evolve with it. There also needs to be shorter investigation times. I watched a documentary, and it was like the time frame for the investigation was like 9 months, and that's ridiculous to say the least. Another proposal would be conducting even more research on which demographic specifically is affected primarily by these attacks within the correctional system. I also feel that more effort needs to be placed into raising awareness of this issue, both inside of prisons and correctional facilities and outside. Um, and there also needs to be implementation of even harder sentencing for perpetrators, regardless of if they're employed or if they're an inmate or if they're part of the administration. Regardless, it should be I feel like the sentences should be even harsher. There also needs to be I guess creation of a newer and more confidential means of reporting concerns or of assault or harassment for inmates as well as staff. And then lastly, I have that more health services need to be put in place for inmates who are uh, about to be released because if there are internalized issues there, then those issues will manifest once they get outside those doors. The following are some of the references, well, the references that were specifically used for this presentation. The majority of these were also used during my policy analysis paper.